It was late on an ordinary evening when Jane pushed open her front door, her heart heavy yet hopeful, expecting nothing more than the familiar comfort of home. Instead, she found her husband and her sister entangled on their bed, a scene that shattered her world in a frozen heartbeat, her trust, her sense of safety, her entire life rewritten in a single moment. That moment defined a betrayal no one sees coming, and no explanation could ever reverse the damage. Yet something inside her stirred, a raw determination taking hold even before the shock had time to fade. And what she chose to do next would not only shock her family, but reshape her fate entirely. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jane had always believed that loyalty was the thread holding her family together. Yet now that very thread had been ripped apart in the cruelest way imaginable, by the two people she trusted most. The images of her wedding day, once filled with joy, clashed violently with the reality of finding her husband and her sister in the very space she had once called sacred. Why would her own sister betray her so deeply? What drove her husband to risk everything they had built together for a moment of reckless passion? And what decision would Jane make that would leave her entire family, her community, and eventually even strangers stunned to their core? These questions weighed heavy, unanswered. But the truth was that Jane was not a woman who would simply collapse under the weight of betrayal. Something inside her was already moving, already preparing for what came next. Jane was known among her friends and neighbors as the kind of woman people could rely on, the one who worked tirelessly to hold her household together even when life tested her resolve. She was hardworking, deeply loyal, and the type of wife who believed that marriage was not just a promise spoken at the altar, but a commitment to be lived every single day. Those who knew Jane often said her greatest strength was her devotion to family, and she carried that devotion like a shield, certain it would protect her from the storms that life inevitably brings. She trusted her family above all, trusted her husband to remain faithful to their vows, and trusted her sister to stand beside her as she always had since childhood. Jane lived by the belief that trust was the foundation upon which every home was built, never imagining that hers was already cracking. Her husband had once been the kind of man who drew people in effortlessly. Charming, well-spoken, and admired in their community, he had the appearance of someone whose life was under control. He was respected in social circles and often carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had the love of a good wife and the stability of a settled home. Yet beneath that polished exterior, subtle cracks had begun to form. The whispers of financial stress had crept into their marriage, quiet arguments over unpaid bills and late nights spent away from home disguised as work obligations. There were murmurs among those close to Jane that he was not always where he claimed to be, hints of infidelity passed in hushed tones, but Jane never allowed herself to believe them. She wanted to trust him more than she wanted to confront the doubts that occasionally flickered in the back of her mind. Her sister was another story entirely. To the outside world, she and Jane had been inseparable since childhood, two sisters who shared secrets, dreams, and endless laughter. They had grown up side by side, bonded by both love and hardship, and for years their relationship had seemed unshakable. But beneath that closeness lived a quiet tension, one that only Jane could sense. Her sister had always lived in Jane's shadow, constantly measuring her own life against the success Jane had built for herself. When Jane married a man admired by many, it only widened that invisible gap between them. Outwardly, her sister smiled, laughed, and played the role of a confidant. Inwardly, resentment grew like a seed watered with jealousy, silent, yet steady. What Jane could not see was that the person she trusted most to guard her back was slowly moving toward the very betrayal that would pierce her heart. The photographs that lined Jane's walls told the story of a family that appeared complete: smiles at birthdays, laughter at weddings, vacations filled with the illusion of happiness. Each frame showed the closeness of siblings and the bond of a marriage that seemed secure, but the truth was far more fragile. The trust Jane had built over years was standing on hollow ground, ready to collapse at the first heavy step. And while she believed her loyalty was being matched in kind, There were secrets buried in the quiet moments when she wasn't watching. As she scrolled through old pictures of family gatherings, she would smile, never suspecting that some of those smiles carried meanings she could not begin to understand. But behind every smile in those photos, there was something darker, a secret waiting to surface. And one night when she arrived home without warning, that secret was laid bare. When Jane returned home that night, there was no warning that her life was about to fracture. She had left work later than expected, tired but eager for rest, and the thought of surprising her family with her early arrival brought a faint smile to her face. She pushed open the front door quietly, the kind of careful entrance she had made countless times before. But the house felt strangely alive. The hallway lights were dim, shadows stretched across the walls, and faint sounds carried down from upstairs. At first, Jane thought little of it. A television, perhaps, or laughter shared between family members. Yet something about the sound stopped her mid-step. It wasn't the innocent laughter of children or the casual murmur of family. It was laughter that cut differently, holding a rhythm she had never expected to hear in her own home. Her heart began to pound as she moved slowly up the stairs, each step echoing louder in her mind than it did on the wooden floorboards. Jane told herself she was imagining things, that nothing was wrong, that her husband and her sister had likely been talking about something trivial and found it amusing. She wanted to believe that explanation, but the uneasy rhythm of her pulse told her otherwise. The laughter shifted into hushed tones, quick exchanges broken by silence, and Jane knew instinctively that these were not the sounds of an innocent conversation. She paused at the top of the stairs, her breath shallow, gripping the banister as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. And then she walked slowly toward the bedroom door, the very place she believed her life was safest, the room she had shared with her husband, the place that was meant to protect her love. The door was closed, but the muffled voices seeped through. Jane pressed her hand against the knob, her mind racing with explanations, none of which could quiet the storm building in her chest. She turned the handle slowly, hoping against hope that she was wrong, that what she felt was nothing more than exhaustion and fear colliding in her imagination. But when the door creaked open, the truth struck with a force she would never forget. In that moment, Jane's world collapsed in silence. Her husband and her sister lay on the very bed that once symbolized trust and unity, their betrayal not whispered but displayed in a cruel tableau that seared itself into her memory. She stood frozen, her body unwilling to move, her voice refusing to rise. The shock paralyzed her, and the fury that followed was swallowed by the weight of disbelief. In the silence that filled the room, Jane's eyes burned, but no tears fell. She wanted to scream, to rage, to demand an explanation that would never heal the wound, but something inside her stopped her from giving them that power. For a fleeting second, neither her husband nor her sister noticed her presence. They were lost in their betrayal, blind to the woman standing in the doorway whose trust they had destroyed. When they did see her, a stillness fell, heavy and suffocating, as if every unspoken word between them was trapped in the air. Jane's hands trembled, but her face gave nothing away. The fury that had ignited in her chest remained hidden, pressed beneath a silence more piercing than any scream could ever be. And in that silence, Jane made a decision that no one expected. But instead of screaming, she simply turned and walked away. At least that's what they thought. By morning, whispers had already begun to spread. A neighbor who lived across the street swore she had seen Jane leave the house in the dead of night, her figure moving quickly and deliberately, as if she were carrying a burden too heavy to be shared. Another claimed she had not just left quietly, but had done so with a look of cold resolve that no one could mistake. Inside the house, the husband told his version of the story, twisting details to make himself appear the victim of a misunderstanding. The sister told hers as well, shaping it to cast doubt on Jane's reaction rather than their own betrayal. To the community, their voices grew louder than Jane's silence, and yet no one truly knew what she was planning. That silence, her refusal to speak, only made the rumors grow stronger, feeding speculation that something larger was already in motion. Theories began to swirl through the town like wildfire. Some said Jane had vanished altogether, that she had left her home for good, and would never return, unwilling to face the shame of her husband's betrayal or her sister's treachery. Others whispered of violence, dark possibilities that she had confronted them both, and that her silence was not a retreat, but a cover for something far more shocking. Every retelling of that night grew more dramatic, and in the absence of truth, fiction became fact in the eyes of those desperate to make sense of the scandal. Jane herself gave no answers. She remained unseen, leaving those who sought certainty to chase ghosts and shadows, each clue leading nowhere. It was this silence, this refusal to respond, that gave birth to the most dangerous kind of story, the one people invent when truth is withheld. Rumors of divorce filings surfaced next, passed between relatives, co-workers, and neighbors who claimed to know more than they really did. Some speculated that Jane had already hired lawyers, moving swiftly to cut ties with the man she had once loved and the sister she had once trusted. Others claimed she was preparing for revenge, gathering evidence in secret, determined to ruin them both in a way that could not be denied. Friends of the family were torn apart as loyalties divided. Some sided with Jane's husband, arguing that mistakes happen and marriages could heal, while others condemned him, disgusted that betrayal could come so easily from the man who had promised her forever. Her own mother's heart fractured as well, torn between two daughters. Yet her words carried a weight Jane never expected. She sided with the younger sister, excusing her actions with the claim that jealousy sometimes overpowers judgment. That choice deepened Jane's silence and widened the gulf that had now split the family in two. The community became obsessed with the story, following every rumor as if it were part of a crime being pieced together. Did Jane truly vanish? Or was she watching quietly from the edges of her own life? Did she confront them in ways no one saw? Or was her silence the calm before an unseen storm? Every question was met with speculation, never truth, and yet each theory only added to the weight of her presence, even when she was absent. For her husband and her sister, life seemed to continue as though Jane's disappearance from their home was permanent, but beneath their confidence was unease. Neither of them could escape the fear that Jane's quiet departure had not been an end, but a beginning. They underestimated her resolve, believing she had chosen retreat over retaliation. But the truth was far more complicated. And then, just when everyone thought she had walked away quietly, she returned. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. For weeks before the night of betrayal, Jane had sensed cracks in the walls of her marriage and in the relationship she thought she had with her sister. The odd phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, the unexplained charges on their bank statement, the receipts folded and tucked away in places they didn't belong. All of it stirred questions she could not ignore. Instead of confronting them in anger, Jane did what no one expected. She began to quietly gather evidence. Phone records were copied and hidden. Bank statements were secured. And when suspicion grew heavier, she went further, installing a small hidden camera in the very bedroom that should have been her sanctuary. Every choice she made was careful, calculated, deliberate. The betrayal she uncovered that night was not the beginning of her story. It was the final piece in the case she had already begun to build. What no one knew was that Jane's preparation extended beyond the personal humiliation of infidelity. The marriage had begun to show financial irregularities months earlier, and Jane noticed patterns her husband tried to conceal. Payments to accounts she had never seen, withdrawals that could not be explained, and signatures on documents that bore his handwriting, but not her knowledge. At first, she believed it was poor judgment, desperate attempts to cover debts he was too ashamed to admit. But the deeper she looked, the more she realized he was not acting alone. Her sister's name appeared quietly on statements and contracts, threaded into transactions that linked back to Jane's own assets. The betrayal was layered. Her trust as a wife shattered by infidelity, her trust as a sister destroyed by deceit, and her security as a woman undermined by financial schemes carried out under her very roof. When Jane returned, she did not arrive in tears or fury, but with the cold precision of someone who had done her homework. A courtroom became the stage where her silence finally broke. Documents were laid out page after page, tracing the trail of deceit that her husband and her sister had woven together. Phone records revealed late-night conversations that were not just intimate but conspiratorial. Receipts showed dinners, hotels, and purchases made with funds siphoned from accounts Jane herself had built through years of hard work. And then came the hidden footage, not salacious, but undeniable. Images of her sister and her husband in her own bed, proof that no words could deny. Gasps filled the courtroom as Jane presented her evidence, not with trembling hands, but with the composure of a woman who had decided she would not be defeated by betrayal. Yet the greatest revelation was not the affair itself. As the lawyers and the judge examined the documents, a deeper fraud emerged. The affair had been the surface wound, but beneath it was an infection of greed. Jane's husband and her sister had been siphoning money from her accounts, funneling it into investments she had never approved, all under the guise of managing family finances. Together, they had forged her signature, falsified agreements, and positioned themselves to benefit from assets that rightfully belonged to her. This was not just betrayal of the heart, it was betrayal of the law. The evidence Jane presented turned a private scandal into a public reckoning, shifting the narrative from whispers of infidelity to the undeniable reality of fraud. In that courtroom, her silence became her greatest weapon. While her husband stumbled through excuses and her sister wept in desperation, Jane's voice carried the weight of truth. She had not stormed out of her home in defeat. She had walked away to prepare her return, and in doing so she destroyed them both, but not in the way anyone expected. The courtroom grew heavier as the truth unfolded, and when the last piece of evidence was read aloud, the silence was deafening. Jane's husband sat slumped, his confidence shattered, his reputation in ruins. Every attempt at denial had been dismantled by documents too precise and details too damning. His charm, the very quality that once drew people to him, crumbled under the weight of humiliation. But it was Jane's sister who broke first. Her composure dissolved in sobs, her voice trembling as she admitted what the evidence had already made undeniable. With tears streaming down her face, she confessed to the affair, to her part in the financial deceit, and to the jealousy that had driven her choices. The confession was not just an acknowledgement of betrayal, it was an admission that she had knowingly destroyed the very bond that once defined her life. The courtroom, once filled with whispers, now sat in stunned silence. Jane, however, did not revel in their downfall. She did not scream, did not hurl accusations, did not allow her pain to consume her in front of those who watched. Instead, she carried herself with the quiet strength that had guided her all along. Her victory was not in their humiliation, but in her decision to reclaim her dignity. She had shown the truth, exposed the lies, and demanded accountability without lowering herself to the chaos they had created. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply turned her back and walked away, determined to build a new life, one where betrayal could never reach her again. Her silence, once misread as weakness, had become her shield, and now it was her liberation. But here's the question. Was justice really served? Some would argue that Jane let them off too easily, that punishment should have gone further, that vengeance should have matched the depth of betrayal. Others believed her greatest revenge was the life she chose to live after walking away, a life free of those who sought to destroy her. Justice, after all, is not always measured in courts or judgments. It is measured in the strength to choose peace when others expect destruction. For Jane, the answer was not about punishing her husband and her sister. It was about refusing to let their betrayal define the rest of her story. The question remains, though, for everyone watching. What would you have done in her place? Years passed, and life moved on. Jane rebuilt herself piece by piece, her silence replaced with determination, and her pain transformed into resilience. Then one day her sister appeared again, her voice softer now, her face marked by regret. She begged for reconciliation, pleaded for forgiveness, and spoke of the years she had lost living with the weight of her choices. Jane listened quietly, her expression calm, her presence steady. She gave no harsh words, no emotional outburst, only silence that once again spoke louder than anything else could. And in the end, Jane turned, just as she had before, and walked away once more. The door to reconciliation closed as firmly as the door she had opened that fateful night, leaving only one truth behind. Jane had won, not through revenge, but through the life she chose to live without them. What would you have done in Jane's place? Would you have chosen forgiveness, extending a hand to those who betrayed you in the deepest way imaginable? Would you have chosen revenge, striking back with the same force of pain that was inflicted upon you? Or would you have chosen silence, letting dignity speak louder than anger ever could? Jane's story reminds us that betrayal is not only about broken vows, but also about the strength it takes to choose how to respond. Her decision to walk away, not once but twice, raises a question that only you can answer. When trust is destroyed by those closest to you, what path do you take? Do you stay and fight? Do you forgive and rebuild? Or do you walk away and create a new life entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective matters in stories like this. And if you thought Jane's journey was shocking, if the revelation of her husband's lies and her sister's confession left you stunned, then prepare yourself for what comes next. Because there is another story, one that begins at a wedding filled with joy, laughter, and promises of forever, and ends in the most unthinkable way. A woman disappeared without a trace on the very day she was meant to begin her new life, and for 15 long years, her loved ones believed she was gone forever. But then, against all odds, she returned. The mystery of where she went, what she endured, and why she came back will grip you in ways you cannot imagine, and it is a story you will not want to miss. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories that grip the heart and shake the soul.